Hello everybody and welcome back to the Avatar of Taipahn. Taipahn. As you know, in the first part we built her, we washed all the parts, we assembled her, and then we went in with some green stuff to do a little bit of gap filling here and there. And you know, I was very full of compliments towards this model because there just wasn't as many gaps as the Altar of the Succubi. Now, that's down to the altar having a lot more parts to it, a lot more things that need to fit together in a certain way. But now we're getting to move on to the beginning stages of painting. And of course, just like in the Avatar, we're going to be priming with the airbrush, and we're going to be using our Stynylrez black surface primer first. So the model will get a complete coat of that, and once that's done, we're going to move on to a grey, and from the grey we're going to move on to a white. Now, this isn't exactly going to be pre-shading, but it is going to help with the subsequent coats of paint that we put on. So we're going to be able to pattern things out, and I'll show you what I mean by that as we move along. So there will be a bit of pre-shading, but a lot of it will be down to getting lighter paints in an area where I know I'm going to be needing other things. So let's just see how we get on. We're going to start with the black, which I have in the airbrush, and then we'll just move on from there. So here we go. So after about 4 or 5 coats of the black primer, this is what we're left with. Now, I needed 4 or 5 coats because I wanted the skin to look very smooth, and I also had to make sure that I'd covered absolutely everything. I didn't want to leave any pieces out, just to make sure that the darkest recesses of the miniature stay black as much as possible. We're now going to be moving on to adding a grey, again Stynylrez matte grey primer. Through the airbrush, quite heavily thinned as well, and the idea of this is to give the miniature a fairly uniform coverage, but obviously a bit more top down so that we're left with a little bit of shadow here and there. So let's just see it through the airbrush first. So yeah, okay. And the way I want to attack it is sort of a top down, so let's have a look at what that does. And you can see how much that contrasts against the black primer as well, makes it a very interesting sort of look to it. So we'll continue on camera here for a little bit longer and see how far we get. So you can see what this is doing now, that the deepest recesses of the miniature have remained black, but the grey is starting to tone it up a little bit. And as it tones it up, we're left with really sharp shadows and really nice shading. And I want to retain that as much as possible throughout the next steps and when we start applying paint. So what I'm going to do is wash the airbrush out, switch over to white, and then we can talk about applying that. So now I'm ready to apply the white. What I'm going to do now is go back to my reference image, which is Queen Ashara from World of Warcraft, and you can see what I mean by trying to hotspot certain parts. So down on her tentacles, I'm basically going to take this colour and apply it to the upper part of the tail, so that's sort of more heavy fleshy sort of thing. But down on this, I'm going to try and carry this lighter colour. It starts on her face very hot and then moves down her chest and down onto her belly, and I want to carry that down and onto the underside of the tail as well. So that's the areas I want to hotspot with the white more often, or in more places than not, and even down onto the upper arms as well. Leaving out her hands will make them pretty dark. So it's always good to have that reference image there just to come back to and go, right, at this stage, even though I'm only priming, I need to be starting to think about, or thinking about where those colours are going to be in the end. So I've got the white in my airbrush now. Now, a little note, I don't completely clean the airbrush out when I'm changing these primer colours. So from the black to the grey, I basically ran a bit of thinner through the airbrush to take most of it out, but there was still a bit of black in there. Same when changing from grey to white, and what that's doing is making these colours a little bit closer to each other. So the grey is a little darker than it would be straight out of the bottle. The white is going to be a little more grey than it is straight out of the bottle, and that lets me fade and feather a little bit more easily. That said though, we'll move on to the white, so we'll have to turn our compressor back on, so apologise for the noise. And what we want to do is start up at the top here on the face, so let's see if I can get her a little bit closer to the camera for this. And we want to do a top down sort of pick out all the face. Very gently let the airbrush feather that out. Like so. And now we can move on down to the chest. Still keeping a top down because we still want to retain the shading under her breasts and under any of the muscle structure that's down onto her belly as well. Okay, we can now go across the arms. Not too much though, I don't want to overdo it. Like that. Now we can move down onto the underside of the tail. And where we're wanting to hotspot is where it's on the upper side, so this side will be lighter than this side. So we can go a bit heavier with the primer there. And then we let it feather off as it curls down underneath to begin that shading. And then on the flip side here, just a little bit more feathered than what it is in the upper surface. And then it fades off a lot quicker too as it gets into the shadow. So we can move around, I think that's enough for her front there. We move around to this area here. So obviously this is going to be quite a hot spot here, so let's try that. So now it's time to move on and start applying some colour. The first colour I'm going to do is the light colour on her skin. So we're going to be going with Citadel Contrast Griffcharger Grey for this, because it's a nice bluey grey and ties in quite nicely with the reference image that I have for Queen Ashara. So let's have a go here. I'm going to apply it with a fairly large brush. And let's just start up at the top. And I'm doing the light colour first because when I come to do the dark colour, I can tidy up any of the lines that I don't like the look of. So let's just see what happens when we start applying our Griffcharger. And I already like what that's doing, so let's just carry on. Let's maybe even go a little bit heavier, I think. Yeah, I think going a little bit heavier helps there. So yeah, we'll see what this does. We'll start to remove it from certain areas to stop it pulling too much. Although it does make her look like she has a fair bit of eyeliner on, which is interesting, or eyeshadow. Anyway, let's move down onto the chin and the neck, down onto her chest. And we'll see what all of our sort of zenithal shading has done to help with the contrast application. And what I do like about it so far is it's giving a real sort of a cold look to the miniature. A very chilling look to her skin so far. So that's not bad. Not bad so far anyway. It's maybe pulling still a little bit much around her face there. See what it's doing around the side of her head. I know she has big ears there as well. So we'll just do those in a light colour too. Although we'll probably go over them with the darker colour. A bit more in there. Carry it out a little bit. Well, we'll see what that does. So I'm going to move on and just do the rest of this sort of underside piece to her, the rest of her body and her tail, and we'll see what happens as this develops on. Hopefully this is going to give me the effect that I really want. So with the Griffcharger Grey now dry, we're going to have a look at a little bit of a dry brush over the skin, because I think it's there, you know, it's practically there, but it just needs a little bit more definition, I think. And I want to move on to that before I start adding any other contrast paints. So what I'm going with is Vallejo Game Color Wolf Grey. I'll just hold that there for a few seconds to make sure you know what it is. And all it is basically a off-white bluey color. It's a very light color, so if I can get it right on my dry brush, all I want to do is to just pick out areas on the skin and on the face. So let's have a look at her face for a start. And all I want to do is brighten up the upper details. Just a little bit, not too much. Something like that. You can see that definition coming up a little bit more. Now, over the more plain details, the more rounded details like her breasts here, for example, you're not going to be doing too much of this because you don't want to make it look powdery or streaky or anything weird like that. So I'm just doing a little bit there on the top of her chest, and you can see how that's starting to pick that out. If we move down her torso a little bit, I'm going to keep the movements of the brush vertical, and maybe a little bit of horizontal movement as well, like so. That's basically all it's going to be, just a little bit of a highlight, and then down onto her tail. Again, we're just going to try and get some of that texture to be brought up a little bit. But potentially only in the areas where the highlight is, you know, from the airbrushing. We only really want to highlight the brighter areas. We don't want to go too far off the reserve a little bit and highlight bits that are going to be largely in shadow. So just a little bit here and there up that side. And that's basically all there's going to be highlighting wise. Now we may add another wash in here at some point just to maybe bring the skin up a touch, but we're not going to be doing too much of that. Also hit the arms a little bit and the hands, because the hands also got the Griffcharger Grey too, so just a little bit to bring that muscle shape back in, define that a touch. That should be enough, because it's just bringing out the texture a little bit better. And that's all I really want, it's just a touch more definition and a little bit more starkness in the skin as well. You know, I want the shape of her lips and her nose to come out a bit more in the upper cheekbones and stuff, but at the same time I just want it to look a bit brighter than what the contrast paint has done, which is largely sort of dulled. It just made it look a little bit darker. So what I'm trying to do here is bring this up as a cold sort of highlight. Now, with that done, we can move on to our next contrast paint, and this is going to be for the dark-skinned side of her. There's going to be a lot of this. There really will be a lot of this, because I want to do all the horns, do these big pieces that are holding the cloth in position, for example, as well, and all on the other side of her tail. So all of that, all of this sort of more rubbery skin sort of texture, that's going to be going the turquoise colour. So I'm going to shake the bottle up a bit. So Pterodon turquoise is what we're going with, another contrast paint. So let's crack it open. And this is where I think we're either going to see I've made it or broke it. So we'll see how this turns out. This is a very dark greeny blue, so it's going to have a very sort of sea green color to it. So let's see where we can start. Let's start up on the horns, up on her head here first, and see how that goes. I understand this is going to look very grey or very dark, but again, we're probably going to do a little bit of a dry brush highlight to it, just to see where we go from there. Although looking at it as it goes down into the lighter part of the airbrush work, it seems to come out a bit brighter, which is great. With the Pterodon turquoise now down, we can now have a look at what we think of the coloration. And I think the contrast we're getting between that really dark sort of sea green along with this really pale, cold looking front, it's very interesting. Now there's a couple of things I want to point out before I go on to actually highlight the Pterodon turquoise. While I was doing that, I've been using a bit of the contrast medium to thin it down a touch, and I've been using that basically to apply patterning to the side of her face. So I've brought it so that the Pterodon turquoise is starting at the side of her face and going back, so where it's darker, obviously on the thicker parts of her hide, also down her sides, which is all down her back as well, and down the back of her arms. So if I tilt her a little bit, you can sort of get a hint that there's all that turquoise, that deep green, bluey green in there, down her back and down the backs of her arms. And also I've done in her lips in the same colour. That's just to add a bit of visual interest in there before we start to go on. Now I'm going to highlight the Pterodon turquoise, and we're going to be using, let me see here, another Vallejo colour. So this is Vallejo Game Colour. This is Scurvy Green that we're using this time. So I'm going to hold it there for a few seconds just to let you see it. And what I'm doing is I'm taking a broad flat brush. Let's see actually if I can find a spot to work from here. And what I'm trying to do, let's get the back of that shoulder in up here. All I'm trying to do is not dry brush it as such, but just run my brush across the raised details just to bring it up a little bit, because it's a little dark at the minute. So that's what I'm trying to do, is to bring up a little bit of highlighting, just to show off that yes, this is a greenish colour, and we're accenting it with a bit more of a green at the same time. And it's going to work fairly well down the patterning and texture of her tail, because we're really just using it sort of as a gentle overbrush, just to capture the higher parts of the texture of her skin. So that's going to work very well on areas that have a higher lighting touch to them. So up along here, for example, and then we can bring it along further down, just to continue that sort of light glinting effect, that the upper surfaces are clearly more visible with the colour, while as everything else almost fades to a very dark green, almost to a black in certain places. And that's going to make her look very interesting to the eye, especially when you have good lighting on her. So at this stage, that's what I'm going to be doing. But after that, I'm going to take some other contrast paint here. I'm going to take some contrast Flesh Terror Red, and I'm going to be putting that onto the banners, onto the wraps, on her swords, and onto her hair. I think we're going to make her hair red as well, just to keep to that reference image of Queen Ashara. We're just going to do that as well. So I'm not going to show that, I'm just going to go ahead and do the rest of the highlighting on the green and then put the red on, because in the next segment, after our next swish or whatever, you're going to see the kind of levels of contrast I'm aiming for here, to have her look very cold and dark, but have certain standout features of her that really make her brighten up and warm up a little bit in certain places. Not all over the place, but yeah, we'll see. I'm going to continue on with the green highlighting, then I'll put the red down, and then we can see where we are after that. With the Flesh Terrors red down, we can now see just how much contrast we're getting off the miniature now. And you can see that cold sort of skin colour and her thicker hide colour really contrasting with this sort of more rich looking red, particularly in the hair and the back of the banners. You can also see very clearly, if I move it back a little bit more to let the light catch it some more, you can really see how much work the airbrushing has done for us while we're using the contrast paints. The contrast paints are almost, they're working more in the shading than they are in the highlight. So they're tinting that white that we put down as the uppermost colour, but they're really darkening the grey and into the black and really sitting very nicely. It's almost a velvety sort of look there. The transitions are nice and smooth in places, and they're tough when they need to be, but overall she's looking very nice with all this red now. So I've also added a little bit of red in particular down here on this plate, just a little bit there, and in and amongst some parts on the shoulder guards as well, just to increase the amount of red that's on the miniature, because as I was working just on these, on the banners, on the parts of the sword and on her hair, I realised she actually needs a little bit more red spread throughout the miniature just to bring that up a bit. And there's still going to be some more red to add, but that's going to be in the form of a more glossy sort of crystal look, I think. I hope anyway, make it a few gems, because we have some details down here that I want to do in the metallics that we're going to move on to now, but they have little gems on them and I want those to be red too, just to continue that theme further down. So, moving on to the metallics, or our first metallic anyway, we're going to be going to the base layer, Retributor armor from Citadel, and we're going to be basically doing all her jewellery, anything else I haven't added in red, and yeah, I think we're going to see a much warmer, more interesting look once we have that down as well, just to really brighten her up a little bit. So I'm going to get some Retributor armor ready here on my brush, and we'll just see how this goes. Now this should really add something different to the model at this stage, because everything else at the minute, even though the red is quite contrasty, it's still a little dull, it's still a little dark. So let's have a look at something, say one of the shoulders here, and let's start to apply the Retributor armor in there. And we will wash it down once we have it all applied, and then we'll really see where this miniature is going. Now I know that these technically look more like bone structure to me, but I want to do them in gold because I want that contrast in there. I want her to look regal, I want her to look important, but at the same time I don't want it to look like everything she's wearing and everything she's garbed in is an organic piece. I want it to look like she's making herself look more spiky through the application of armor plate and stuff like that, that's modeled or molded in the same sort of way as her natural sort of horns and protrusions. And this should make things look quite interesting. So we'll see how this works, and then we can go from there. We can start shading and stuff too. Well, now we have the gold down, and I thought I'd change my camera angle a little bit and actually give you guys a more my perspective, or my perspective, so from where you can see the model. And you gotta admit, she does look very regal with all that gold and that little bit of red hiding in through some of the trim and stuff like that. I think she's looking very good. I've also added some gold further down here because I have some plans for these bits that are around these gold parts, as well as the center of the gold, which I want to do in gems, as well as the pommel of each of her swords. We're going to make that sort of like a red crystally orb in there, just to add a bit more brightness to her. So I do have more to work with on the gold. There's still going to be shading and highlighting to do, but there's another step that I want to do. There's two steps that I would like to begin pretty sharpish. So first off, I want to paint the eyes. I want to give her nice glowy, evil, orangey sort of eyes. And then down here you can see on her rib cage we have these protrusions here. and around her breasts and stuff like that. There's this sort of stuff. And I was initially going to do that gold as well, but then I realized it kind of looks a bit more like a different sort of material, so I'm going to paint that in Army Paint or Necromancer Cloak as sort of a very dark grey, and then when we give it a bit of a wash with a dark tone, it'll look black with a little bit of highlight, and we can still go in there with some highlights and work on that too. But the important thing now is to nail the eyes, really get the eyes down, and I'm going to be using a contrast paint, but I'm not going to be using one of their base colours to apply the contrast onto. I'm going to be using Army Paint or Arid Earth. It's a very bright, sort of chalky yellow, or pastel yellow, or whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to use that as the base because the colour I'm going to put over it is going to be Iandan yellow, something like that, and then probably edge it with a little bit of an orange as well, just to really give her an intense stare on her eyes. So what we want to do first is get in here with a small brush and remove some of it from the bristles, and I want to base coat the eye with Arid Earth. And I'm not too worried about going over the edges at this point because her eyelids and the little protrusions coming down from those are going to be the same colour as the other stuff, so they're going to go the Necromancer Cloak. So the idea is to get this first and then use that subsequent step to tidy it all up. So I just need to get in here, still trying to be as neat as I can. Like that, and we'll probably give this a couple of coats because I want it to be quite a strong colour as well. And I think once that's framed, once the eyes are finished and they're framed with the Necromancer Cloak, we're going to have a very intense looking face. So I'm going to let this dry, put another couple of coats down, and then we can look at the contrast paints. So with 2 coats of Arid Earth now down, they are dry, we're now going to apply our contrast paint, and it is Iandan yellow. I'm going to forever struggle with the pronunciation of this one until someone tells me, a better way to do it. So we're just going to apply this into the eye socket. Make a bit of space for my arm, just to get around the camera. Right. We're getting a nice sort of look there. I love the way that the contrast paints always pull away, and that's what I was hoping it would do in this instance. Do you know, maybe not. Do you know what, that's actually kind of cool as it is. I'll maybe not add anything else in there. Yeah, I think I won't add anything else in there. I'll probably let that dry. So obviously if you put too much in there, you could clean your brush off and then start taking it away again. And what I may do as a final touch is, once that contrast paint is dry, is take our Arid Earth again and just do the center of each eye. You can already see where it's pulling away from, so I can use that as a guide. And then possibly with a very small brush, put some irises in there, but do slit irises to make her look a bit more, I don't know, do snakes have slit eyes? No, they don't really, do they? But I'm going to do that anyway, because I think that's going to look kind of cool. So yeah, we're going to let that dry, and then when we come back, we'll have a look at starting to apply at least the Necromancer Cloak, and then we'll maybe see about putting in some irises as well. With the eyes now dry, it's time to work on some of our Necromancer Cloaks. This is the paint we're now working on. And I'm going to be using it to outline her eyelids, her eyebrows, I think, as well, maybe, because I don't necessarily want any more red here, so make it look like her hair's been dyed at some point, and her eyebrows are just a darker colour, or even made of a different material. I mean, who knows? It's a giant snake lady. It could be anything. There's also, I noticed, some rings on the other eyebrow here. I'll be hitting them with gold again once I have this down. So the first stage is the one that's going to make me feel great about this, because I want this to work on the eyes first. So I have to get pretty close. Hopefully be able to get this all painted in nice and neatly. I'll probably do some of this off screen actually, but I just want to show my thinking here, because if I don't show my thinking, then you're not going to understand the reason for it. So, I mean, basically the reason is to draw attention to her eyes by making everything around the eyes darker. So if we make everything around the eyes darker, then the work we've done with the contrast paint and the Arid Earth should make it stand out a lot more and a lot brighter. Let's hit this eyebrow as well. And this will probably take a couple of coats, and then we'll have to give it a dark wash as well just to make it work. But you can kind of see what I'm aiming for here. The more it's framed, the more the eye itself stands out. So we're going to push on with this and work down onto the likes of these areas down here and this stuff that's underneath her breasts here, down the sides, and there's some that works around her back as well. Just where her hips would be normally. And we're just going to pick out areas that I think are going to suit this colour, and when we come back we'll have a look at what this is going to look like and how we think the eyes have turned out. So I do apologise for not doing more under camera, but at the same time I need to get right up close with this at this point, just to make sure that I'm doing it right. So when we come back you'll see it down and we'll see what it looks like.